Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the National Native Health Research Training Initiative November webinar. We're just holding on a second here to let everybody make sure that everyone gets into the webinar out of the waiting room. So we'll just wait a few more seconds and we'll get started. Okay, Maggie, go ahead and put up the first.
All right. Can you see that, Rachel?
No. I just see all the participants.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Okay, here we go. All right, Rachel, can you see that okay?
Yes.
All right.
Welcome to the National Native Health Research Training Initiative November webinar. It's the June, July, August, September, October, 6th of 8 webinars that we are hosting this summer and fall and into the winter. We're thankful that you are all able to join us. We're going to go ahead and get started with our opening blessing that Mr. Harrison Platero will be providing for us. Mr. Platero is Diné from the Canõncito band of Navajo. His homeland is located west of Albuquerque in New Mexico. He has been a member of the Native Research Network, which is one of the partners in this webinar partnership since its inception. Mr. Platero believes in the mission and objectives of the Native Research Network organization to serve professional researchers and Native communities. I'll go ahead and let him take it from here and he can introduce himself further if he would like. Thank you, Mr. Platero, for offering the blessing.
And thank you for asking. Harrison from Canõncito, and my clan is, and I like to say that in Navajo, Kia Ani Ainsle, Ado Tlogabashchin, Kappa Hedashanella, Arna Kaidane, the Shache, without an Ainsle. Ado here, Arna Twidi, Dino Sagi, DJ, so the Zunba, the Hedit, the Digibai Kins, and out of the net, so the Zun Ebe, High Stigi, be Yeti, I don't know. Kodo, Bojodo less. Nahasashama, Yadashkis, Tar. Better your cast, no dead is. Naho Tsui, Charles Hess. Sasna Jin, so this, do go sleep, do the bensa. This, now deadly, Joel Eni, hashed a Yatki, Shay, hashed a one, Shay. Your sky is Sashama, a son at Lehishama, not that sky is key, not that sui at aid. Yoda at Sas A, is at Sas A, Twa at Ha Nashchin, Hobbyage, Traditin, a son, Nast Ani at aid, Sada Sha'a. Na rei ashki ik equajon at aid ado wajon hastling ado hehen get the schnitole that's what I not agi DJ yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Platero, for that beautiful prayer. We'll go ahead and get started with the webinar. Maggie, if you can put the slide set back up. I will be serving as your host in partnering with Maggie to get us through this webinar. My name is Rachael Tracy. I work with the Indian Health Service as the research director and also serve as the chair of our national IRB. She Rachael Tracy and she Twin Shle Tkabahe Bushes Chin Winani Dashache Deshchini Dashanella. My family, my mom's family is from Oak Springs, Arizona on the Navajo reservation, and my father's family is from Ganado, Arizona. I currently live in Maryland, and I've been working with the Indian Health Service for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was with the National Institutes of Health, National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute for almost 14 years. And it's been a really exciting time to be working here with the Indian Health Service. What we'll start off with is we'll have Maggie go ahead and give us the webinar protocol and how things are going to work. And then we'll get started with our first speakers. Oh, I'm sorry. I also wanted to mention that the National Native Health Research Training webinar grew out of a partnership that we have between the Indian Health Service, American Indian Higher Education Consortium, or AHEC, and the Native Research Network, or NRN. We've had this partnership going for about 4 years, and we were in the process, or we have sponsored 3 national research conferences over the years, and we were in the process of setting up our 4th one when the pandemic hit and caused us to first delay the research conference, and then we had to just change strategies and cancel the research conference. So that's how our webinar series came to light, and we're focusing on promoting and training research activities within American Indian, Alaska Native communities. Also a big emphasis on reaching out and partnering with Native researchers, clinical researchers, a variety of different partners, all the way from the National Institutes of Health down to, or across to tribal communities, universities and colleges, partnering to bolster our American Indian, Alaska Native research capacity. And it's been a really exciting partnership to work with AHEC and the NRN and their long history, NRN's long history of doing this type of activity over, I think, 20 years, 25 years. We're glad to have them as a partner, and as well the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. So Maggie, if you can go ahead and get started with the webinar protocol.
Sure. Hi, my name is Maggie Grandin. I work with the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, or AHEC. So just a couple things. I'm sure you all know this, having attended webinars likely during this COVID pandemic for sure. We do ask that you keep yourself muted, so your phones, computers, and microphones. We will have a question and answer time following each presentation as time allows. We do anticipate that we will have time for a Q&A session after each presentation. To ask questions, all you need to do is type it in the chat box, and we will make sure that we ask those questions during the session time. Additionally, if you're not sure how to type into the chat box, you can send them to me at mgrandin@ahec.org, and you should see that up on your screen if you're viewing this webinar. And I will check my email, and we'll make sure to get those answered for you. Additionally, we are going to have an evaluation after each presenter, so please look for that evaluation to display on your computer screen. And then if you're unable to complete it, maybe you've called into this webinar today, we're also going to post it on the NNHRT website. And just so you know, this session is being recorded, and it will be available on the NNHRT website as well, along with our presentation material and the evaluation I just mentioned.
Thank you, Maggie. So I don't know if you can scroll down on that, on the PowerPoint. So we'll go ahead and get started. Our first presenter is Dr. Arun Balajee, who comes to us from, she is the Associate Director of Global Health Sciences in the Division of Viral Diseases in the National Center of Immunization and Respiratory Diseases at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Dr. Balajee currently leads the Technical Assistance Team, Tribal Support Section in the Centers for at the CDC COVID-19 response. She recently deployed to the Navajo Nation and Hopi Tribe to support the COVID response in those communities. Welcome, Dr. Balajee, and you're welcome to get started.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Arun Balajee, and I was just introduced. Currently, I'm deployed in the Tribal Support Section within the CDC's emergency response for COVID-19. So today, my presentation would be something that we did when I was deployed to Hopi a couple of months ago, an outbreak investigation, and the lessons that we learned because of that outbreak investigation. Before I get into the presentation, I want to thank both the Hopi Nation and the Indian Health Services for their collaborations and graciousness with their time, without which this study and the work that I'm going to present would never have happened. I also want to say thank you to Maggie for reaching out to us, as well as NNHRT to have given us a space to share this presentation with you. One thing to note is I was not able to launch this from my laptop, so I'm going to ask Maggie for help in moving my slide deck. Maggie, can we go to the next slide? The second slide. Sorry for the technical difficulty. Maggie, can you hear me? Can we go to the second slide, the content slide?
Yes, let me get there. Okay. All right, I think we're good.
Okay. The second slide, if you don't mind. It should say contents. This is the first one. Maggie, can you hear me?
I can. Let me see. I don't. Is
Or
that
not?
work?
There you go. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So for today's presentation, I will describe a COVID-19 outbreak investigation from Hopi tribe, illustrate the challenges of controlling the virus, but also present an enhanced surveillance program that was developed from the lessons that we learned with this outbreak investigation in Hopi that aim to strengthen community surveillance and mitigation efforts. Both of this work has been published recently in the November issue of Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. And both of this work was enabled by me deploying with to the field in Hopi with a team of CDC colleagues. The next slide, Maggie. Thank you. Thank you. So the Hopi are an American Indian tribe and a sovereign nation residing in 1.5 million acre reservation in northeastern Arizona. If you look at the right of the slide, you can see in turquoise Hopi reservation represented. And orange is the Navajo reservation, which surrounds the Hopi reservation. The inset is showing both the Hopi and the Navajo in the northeastern part of Arizona. So in the beginning of the pandemic, Hopi Nation declared a state of emergency in March. They didn't see their first cases from the reservation until April. And the idea was that the state of emergency can then be lifted in June if this continued. However, early in June, the Hopi Health Center started reporting increasing case counts. And so an outbreak investigation was launched by the Hopi Health Center in collaboration with the Hopi Nation and CDC deployed team on the ground. Next slide, please. So this slide actually starts with the story on June 3rd, 2020. If you look on the left-hand side of the slide, that's where this outbreak investigation started, with a 73-year-old woman with COVID-19-like symptoms presenting to the Hopi Health Center Emergency Department. She subsequently tested positive for SARS-CoV-2. She was interviewed by the Public Health Nurse Department in the Hopi Health Center for a symptom onset date, and also to collect information on close contacts from 2 days before the symptom onset until the interview. On June 4th, 2020, contact tracing was initiated with the Public Health Nursing Department in the Hopi Health Center. Close contacts and the secondary contacts of close contacts were identified and interviewed by telephone, and they were asked to come to the Hopi Health Center for testing. During the course of the outbreak investigation and the contact tracing, we came to realize there were 2 co-index patients. Although the 73-year-old woman was the first to seek healthcare, there were 2 siblings, both the 73-year-old woman and her sibling, who we thought we understood were co-index patients, because both of them, you will see in a minute, had similar exposure, they had similar symptom onset dates, and they had overlapping close contacts. Next slide, please. This is how the outbreak investigation, contact tracing, the events unfolded when we began to interview the contacts. So on the 23rd of May, the index case, now that we're calling 2 index cases as 2 co-index cases, A and B, went to a retail store in Flagstaff and spent a couple of hours in that retail store shopping for items. They wore intermittent masks at that time, not all the time, but some of the times. Then they got in the car and drove back to the Hopi reservation with masks some of the times in the car, and not all the time. On May 27th, the co-index case A went to work and met a work colleague, and that evening she visited a family member after work. The same day, she developed symptoms at home, headache and cold-like symptoms. On May 28th, the co-index patient B developed symptoms. On May 29th, both the co-index patients A and B invited close family members to a dinner after having planting in the morning and dinner in the evening. 15 people were invited. Just to remind you, by 27th and 28th, both patient A and B had developed symptoms. May 30th, both the co-index patient A and B attended a graduation reception dinner where 25 people attended. On May 31st, the co-index patient A were visited by family members and 4 of the kids of the family members. And then on June 3rd, as we just showed you, the co-index patient A tested positive. And June 5th, the co-index patient B tested positive. And in between that, on June 4th, the work colleague also tested positive. Between May 31st to June 4th, there were a couple of other family members visiting co-index patient A as well. Can we move to the next slide? So this illustration presents the same events in a different way. Co-index patient A and B are shown by green and blue circles. As we just showed you, co-index patient A exposed a work colleague denoted by the number 1, and she in turn exposed household members who later turned positive. There were a couple of dinners that both the co-index patient A and B attended, as well as a graduation dinner that co-index patient A attended. and a couple of family visits and dinner at the house of co-index patient A. Can we go to the next slide, please? At the end of it, there were, out of the 60 cases that were identified, 60 contacts that were interviewed. This was the information of the demographic and clinical characteristics of the SARS-CoV-2 positive cases. If you look at the age, there were a lot of children who were identified through this contact tracing. There were more females than males in this cluster. Almost half of the cases that were identified had comorbid conditions that included diabetes mellitus, obesity, and others. On the right-hand side is a table showing the characteristics of symptoms that range from fever to abdominal pain to general malaise. There were also 7 cases that tested positive that had no symptoms and were asymptomatic. Can we go to the next slide, please? So as we were doing this outbreak investigation, Maggie, can we move? Thank you. So the public health response to this outbreak was multifaceted. The Hopi Emergency Response Team, which is part of the Hopi Nation, along with the public health nurses, coordinated the needs for the contacts and the cases to help with isolation and quarantine. There was also a communication team that was deployed to help the communities understand the increase in the number of cases and the need to wear masks, the need to physical distance, and the need to wash hands and follow hygiene. Next slide, please. This slide shows the main findings of the outbreak investigation. As we just heard, as I just mentioned, there were 2 co-index patients that resulted in 58 primary and secondary contacts. 4 of them were household members, 14 were family gatherings, 7 were because of household visits, and 1 was a workplace contact. Almost half of them had at least one underlying condition. Next slide, please. So the lessons learned from this outbreak investigation were many. We understand that 2 family gatherings and 1 workplace exposure caused SARS-CoV-2 transmission into the broader community. Both the gatherings had over 10 persons in attending, and this was during a stay-at-home order in the Hopi Nation. Multi-generational households allowed frequent social interaction among extended family members. We also found during contact tracing that there was limited understanding of physical distancing and mask wearing, and also not proper isolation and quarantine practices. Next slide, please. Because of all of this, the Hopi Nation, along with the deployed CDC team and the Hopi Health Center, developed what we called at that time an enhanced community-focused COVID-19 surveillance program to reach the communities that were both testing positive as well as people in the community, so that they can understand how best to stay safe and also bring the cases that needed to be tested to the Hopi Health Center for testing. Next slide, please. So let's kind of recap what we learned from the outbreak investigation. We know that both the cases and the contacts, even though they developed the symptoms, they delayed care seeking and testing. We found that there was inconsistent mask wearing and physical distancing in the community at the time of this outbreak. There was also a lack of knowledge about what were the ways to safely practice isolation and quarantine in the community. Next slide, please. So this program which we call the Enhanced Surveillance Program, was led by community health workers. Community health workers belong to the Hopi Nation's Department of Human and Health Services. The way the program worked is the community health workers went to every household in every village Hopi Nation had 12 rural villages, and they would screen for the symptoms. And when they see a patient, a case that is symptomatic in the community, they will recommend the case to go and get testing in the Hopi Health Center. At the same time, they also provided the education that the community needed, whether it is for safe isolation or quarantine, or proper mask wearing, or how to physically distance. Next slide, please. So this was field tested in June and July in 2 villages in the Hopi Nation. And 5 teams went out to these villages, screened 141 people, and it took 5 hours per village. And there were 2 cases that were actually identified, were symptomatic, and sent to the Hopi Health Center through this field testing program. We found there was a 5% refusal rate at the community level to allow the community health workers to do this program. Next slide, please. So we talked about the community education materials. The community health workers, when they went into the community, they had a variety of materials in a package. Like I said, they had motivational materials. They had materials that allowed education in the community to understand what to do to stay safe at home, how to care for sick people, and other materials that the community health workers left in the houses of the community members, but also showed them and talked them through some of these materials. Next slide, please. As I said, to summarize, the pilot implementation showed huge positive feedback from stakeholders, both from the Indian Health Service, Hopi Health Center, Hopi Nation, and the community. We hear now that each of the villages have been visited at least once by community health workers. And we also know that during the second wave of this pandemic, this program has really had great impacts, because the communities now understand how to stay safe even through the second wave of SARS-CoV-2. The next slide, please. So to summarize both of the this group of work, we presented an outbreak investigation in a tribal nation. This outbreak investigation identified that the communities were delaying health-seeking behavior, even when they had COVID-19 symptoms. We also saw and understood and learned that there was inconsistent adherence to recommended mitigation measures, whether it's mask wearing or physical distancing. We also found that there was limited knowledge of the roles of testing, isolation, and quarantine procedures. Because of this, the Hopi Nation launched an enhanced surveillance program through their community health workers and was piloted to address the above gaps. In this rural, low-resource setting, house-to-house COVID-19 surveillance and education was feasible and had huge success and impact in the Hopi Nation. I want to say thank you to the Hopi tribe and the Hopi Health Center, all of the healthcare workers in the Hopi Health Center who put their lives every day on the line to serve this community. I also would like to thank all of the IHS colleagues listed left on this, as well as the Hopi Nation and the Department of Human Health Services of the Hopi Nation, as well as the community health workers and my own colleagues, Harpriya Kaur and Rachel, who were the co-lead investigators in this work that I presented here. I'm going to stop here and see if there are any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Balajee, for that very interesting and informative presentation. It reminded me of how important public health is to our healthcare system and the types of activities that public health is responsible for and how they're integrated into the healthcare system. It also reminded me of how important our community health representatives are to our healthcare system. And it also, I think, reminds everyone of how important it is to follow the guidelines, the safety guidelines. I know in the beginning with how quickly this pandemic hit our Native communities, there was a lot of catching up that needed to happen with education, not only on the treatment side, but really getting in there and educating our communities, because I think that's where a lot of where we fell behind. But hopefully, and I think even now to this day, and we're going through our second surge, I think there's still a lot of educating that needs to happen out there, but it's a really a positive thing to see how the Hopi tribe and the healthcare system out there responded to the first surge that was taking place out there. We do have a couple of questions. I think we have a couple of questions. Let me see here. We had one come in that was Judith Arroyo is asking if there were cultural issues around contact tracing that people should look for when they're undertaking that type of activity. And then also, what would you predict might be uptake on possible COVID vaccine? How can we encourage tribal support?
Yeah. So I think having the communities and the tribal nation understand the vaccine and how that can, support how it can reduce transmission in the communities is very important. The more information they can get and provide that to the communities regarding vaccine, that would be very important. I also think that what we heard, I was talking to my Hopi colleagues today, and we heard that the trust of the communities was strengthened by using these community health workers, because the communities trust these community health workers, and these community health workers are often from the same communities that they serve. So using them to increase and boost trust for the vaccination could be one way to do this. So the cultural challenges with contact tracing, I think it varies from tribe to tribe. For us in Hopi, we were very lucky that we actually had the community health workers and the public health nurses. Most of them were from the communities that they serve, and they understood the cultural practices and the way to work around it when they were doing contact tracing there.
Thank you. That's a pretty good suggestion or a strategy, I think, that tribal communities can use and employ, I guess, is when distributing or educating the community about the vaccines, the upcoming vaccines. I think that's a really good strategy as far as working with the CHRs to make those contacts out in the community and within the families. That's a really good idea.
Even to understand what's driving the hesitancy, I think. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Do we have time for one more question, Maggie? I don't see
one more.
Okay.
I have a question. I'm Charlene Pula. I'm Hopi Tewa and Navajo, and home for me is First Mesa Palaka. And my dad still lives out there, so I hear from him the coordination that's going on out home. And I think one of the things I was interested in is the coordination between Hopi Healthcare and Tuba City Healthcare, because I know relatives, are going back and forth between those two systems. And has that coordination been strengthened?
Yes, I would hope so. I think this was after my time of deployment there, but what I'm hearing is that they did set up a coordination center to the Hopi emergency response system, the Hopi, they call it the HEMA, and that has helped a lot in coordinating the response and the two health centers and the way the patients are moving from one part of the reservation to the other. I think that's helping. More needs to be done, but really coordinating this to the Hopi emergency response and providing them the capacity to coordinate has helped a lot. That was a very good question. And we saw that as a challenge in the beginning, but I hear that it's becoming better as the days go by.
Thank you.
Dr. Balajee, are you going to stay with us through the end of the webinar? Till
Till 3 o'clock? Is that right? Or
it
till
actually
4?
goes to 4.
Would you like me to? I'm happy to.
I'm just wondering if anyone is going to have any additional questions, but if you're not able to, we understand. We can make sure that we pull any questions that are directed for you, and we'll send those to you so that we can respond. But
I'm happy to
you're
stay
welcome.
till. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Thank
Thanks.
you, everyone, for participating in that. So one thing we forgot to mention at the beginning of this of the webinar was that we are going to be doing a quick evaluation after each presentation, and Maggie will take care of that. It's going to take maybe a minute. She'll explain a little bit more.
All right, so hi everyone. I'm just gonna pull up it'll take you maybe a minute or two to take the evaluation. Hopefully you see it pop up on your screen if you're on a computer or a digital device. If you can just go ahead and complete that now, and then we'll get back to our presentations.
Yeah, and make sure to scroll all the way down to the bottom of the evaluation.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Great, so we'll give it just another minute here. If you haven't yet taken the evaluation, go ahead and complete that now if you can.
Can you pop it back up again?
It should still be up.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure what I did with it.
All right, just about 10 more seconds here. I'm just seeing the last responses come in. All right, and that's it. Thank you, everyone. And Rachel, I'll give it back to you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for participating in that. We'll move on to our next presenter, who is Dave Wilson, who is coming to us from the National Institutes of Health, Office of the Director, Tribal Health Research Office. And he told me to keep his intro short, so I'll let him introduce himself and start his presentation. Thank you, Dave, for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you all. Can you hear me okay? Am I coming across nice and clear? Wonderful. So welcome everybody. My name is Dave Wilson. I'm the director of the Tribal Health Research Office, like Rachel had mentioned. And what thinking about this as the National Native Health Research Training Initiative, I really want everybody who's on the call or in the meeting listening to think about what I'm going to present here in a way that is very different and conventional. What we do in our office is very holistic. So think about all the different things that we're doing, because a lot of things that I'm going to talk about, people conventionally don't say, wow, I didn't know that the NIH would do those kind of things or be thinking about pursuing these kind of different activities because they're so focused on biomedical research. But you can do both. And that's what I really want to deliver this message on as I go through my presentation. So first, I'm going to cover a little bit about our office. And then I want to talk about some of our accomplishments, some of our notable accomplishments. I can't go through all of them, but I will go through just a couple. And then I will really talk more in depth about COVID-19 and how our office has been helping tribal communities across the country deal with the pandemic. So something I think that's really important, again, this goes back to the holistic approach, is thinking about our relationship with the federal governments, that each of our tribal nations are sovereign entities and they should be treated as such. And there's a lot that goes in terms of recognizing this relationship between the governments, the government to government relationship. I think something else that's critically important is understanding that we have 574. You can see this has not been updated. I forgot to put it in there, but there are 574 federally recognized tribes, and the number of citizens is actually growing, getting closer to 5 million people. But within that, what's really important is that we all have our own unique histories, cultures, languages, traditions, governmental structures. And this is important. This is important not only for research, but also how we address issues like the pandemic. You know, how do we go into communities and how do we engage communities around participating in clinical trials if we're not taking into consideration that each of these communities is very different. So more specifically about our office, you can see here that the NIH is located within the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and we work very closely with Rachael, who is at the Indian Health Service, and we've actually we've done a lot of work with CMS, with CDC, with SAMHSA, HRSA, FDA. These are all very close collaborators of ours, and I think that's a really beneficial feature of our office. But as we get if we dive in a little deeper to the NIH and its structure, it's comprised of 27 institutes and centers, and each of these institutes or centers have a very specific focus. Some of them are focused on heart, lung, and blood, or cancer, or mental health, and our job is to actually be able to coordinate the research that happens with tribal communities all across these 27 institutes and centers. So last year, the NIH received a budget of $43 billion, and that continues to grow, which we're extremely appreciative of, and that just shows us the importance of how biomedical research impacts not only the health of the nation, but the health of the world. So our office is actually very new. We were established in 2015. We are located in the office of the director. I think one of the really unique functions of our office is that we are a trans NIH operating office, like I had mentioned earlier, is that we coordinate all the research activities within all the different institute centers. And we have a big focus on research careers, programs, communities, policies, and health research as a whole. So something that we were very proud of, and I think really helped guide the NIH in terms of how we work with tribal communities, is to establish the first trans NIH strategic plan for tribal health research. And here you can see the 4 pillars of the things that we've been trying to accomplish. And this really, I think, gave our agency milestones to really look at and goals and objectives to shoot for when we're trying to increase the biomedical research in tribal communities, and increase not only that, but build infrastructure capacity, but all do this with a lens of cultural competency and with a lot of community engagement. So something that's critical to the way we operate is our NIH Tribal Advisory Committee. And here you can see on a map to the right of the picture are the 12 IHS service areas. And we have tribal leaders who are appointed from each of these different areas to serve on our committee. And they help guide the NIH's investment on our research as it happens in tribal communities across the country. They give us recommendations. They also bring to our attention areas of concern or issues around research, and help us work to develop solutions to address these, so that tribal communities have the opportunity to participate in biomedical research, which it really hasn't been a strong focus for a long time, and now it has really become a really important focus of the agency. So some of the notable accomplishments that we've been able to achieve in our short term of existence is that one of the things we're extremely proud of is that we were able to establish one of the first data sharing agreements with a federally recognized community or tribe, and that was with the Navajo Nation. This was critically important because I think that all of us are aware that data sharing, data management, and data access are really critical elements of issues that are really important to tribal communities because of unethical research that's happened in the past. So it was really, I think, a long-term engagement, a long-term process to rebuild the relationship where the Navajo Nation felt comfortable in allowing this research study to move forward, because it had, I think, has a tremendous amount of potential to provide good information, good research data to help improve the lives of mothers and children on the Navajo Nation who may be living close or in proximity to open uranium mines. Something else that we're really proud of that continues to build, and this was a picture that we took last year of our cohort of AIN summer interns who come to the NIH and conduct research in labs, but we also want them to be aware of how does our research get funded. And so we took them down to the Hill where they were able to meet Native American members of Congress and have conversations with them about how important these leaders of Congress are to funding, biomedical research and what biomedical research means to their communities. So this is, this probably won't happen next summer, but we're hoping that to get back into this so that we can begin to continue this relationship with members of Congress so that they can see the number of students that are really interested and motivated to learn biomedical research, but also be able to be advocates for biomedical research in their communities. So now we're going to take a little bit of a shift and talk more about the SARS-Corona virus, SARS-CoV-2 as they call it. And here you can see a picture, a really nice picture that was produced by the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Disease. On the left is the coronavirus with the spike protein, that little triangular projection that's coming out. And then on the right side are our human cell bodies, and that is the ACE2 receptor that specifically binds this spike protein. And this allows the virus to infect the cells or enter the cells, gain entry. So one of the first things in March when SARS-CoV-2 began to come over and the outbreak began, one of the first things that the agency did and our office led was a really short turnaround tribal consultation on COVID-19 research. And this was really important because we really needed to seek input from the tribal communities about what were their priorities, what would they need to help overcome the pandemic. And I think this was well before we really knew the magnitude and extent of how this pandemic would take over the country. But we did have a very good, productive consultation with the communities. We developed a lot of information from that. And from the information that we received during consultation, we were able to craft and draft funding announcements that would allow or that would support tribal communities in the way that they needed to address the pandemic in their areas. So why was that critically important? Well, you see the history of tribal communities and their experiences with pandemics, whether it was back in 1918 or whether it was as recently as 2009 with the swine flu. Native Americans have been harder hit than the general population in both of these instances. And we're seeing that again with the current COVID-19 pandemic. So it's really important to think about how we can engage these communities and allow them to participate in clinical trials to help address or to help make sure that we are able to treat the disease before it has its devastating effects, as we've seen in other populations as well. So one of the messages that we really want to continue to convey is what are the benefits of receiving a COVID-19 vaccine? Why should individuals participate? So it's critically important to talk about the reduction of severity of illness, that people who participate in clinical trials, that they, depending upon the vaccine's effectiveness, that they may not get as sick as other people that they've seen who don't get the vaccine. Or they also may be protected entirely after they build up immunity to the vaccine. So those are individual protections, but I think what's more important are community protections for tribal members. That we can really be able to reduce the rate of transmission, which we've seen that's really accelerating across the country right now. And when this happens, our communities, which many of them are driven by casinos or by other in-person economies or face-to-face interactions, that they're not able to run. We have to shut those down, and that has a tremendous and a devastating impact on the viability of our tribal economy. So, and not only that, but it also jeopardizes the health of our wisdom, our knowledge keepers. The elders in our communities, who are most susceptible, and those who have underlying conditions. Our communities have a lot of underlying conditions that we're continuing to deal with, whether that be diabetes or heart disease, high blood pressure. These are all indicators that people who have these underlying health conditions and they get a severe form of the virus, they have very poor outcomes. So we're hoping that through education, through participations in clinical trials, that we'll be able to reduce the number of individuals, that suffer poor outcomes from infections. Some of the things that we get questions about all the time are, can these vaccines cause infection? Can you get the virus from this? And the question or the answer is absolutely not. The reason being is that if you make 100 tires, like if you're producing a car, if you make 100 tires or you make 100 steering wheels, you will never be able to drive that off the lot. Same goes for the vaccines, that the vaccines are producing single proteins, which are the spike proteins. They're producing many of these, but they're not producing the entire virus. So without that, you will never be able to get a fully functional infectious virus particle. So that is an absolute no, and it's a real concern to a lot of members within our community. Second question we get a lot are, how can these clinical trials take place so quickly? We've heard a lot about the operational warp speed, but is this at the detriment, or is this sacrificing some safety protocols in the vaccine development? And we say to that, absolutely not. What's very unique about this process is that each phase of clinical trial is happening, but it's happening overlapping. Where traditionally here you can see that phase 1 would be butted up, it would be end to end to phase 2, and then following phase 2 would be phase 3. And you can see the timelines on these, and these just add up. So you have phase 1, 12 months, phase 2, 2 years, and phase 3, 2 years and plus. But what's unique and different about this is that now these phases are running concurrently. And right now, many of the clinical trials that we're seeing on the news are right now in phase 3. And as we get closer to phase 4, which would be an FDA-approved vaccine, and after individuals receive those, we will continue to monitor those for a long period of time to see if there are any long-term effects from receiving this vaccine in the future. So some of the things, or some of the clinical trials companies that we've been partnering with at the NIH through Operation Warp Speed, here you can see there's been a lot of news or information about Moderna. Recently, they released their findings that the mRNA platform that they use has been 95% effective in reducing the severity of the disease in those who participated in clinical trials. Pfizer is also another mRNA platform that had really positive results. The challenging thing about these two platforms, mainly for Pfizer, is that it requires extremely cold storage temperatures. These are stored at -80. And that is colder than the Arctic. So it's very challenging in rural communities to be able to store this vaccine in large quantities. Moderna is less of an issue because they've been able to stabilize their product, and I believe it only needs to be stored at -20, which is a conventional freezer. Others that are currently in phase 3 clinical trials are the AstraZeneca, the Johnson & Johnson or Janssen. These are both common flu viral vectors that they're using to introduce the products into our bodies. And then Novavax and Sanofi, which are protein-based vaccines. So what these do, why the Novavax and the Sanofi are later to roll out, is because it's a little more complicated to produce very large numbers of the stabilized spike protein. So what they're doing is they are injecting just that purified protein and an adjuvant into our intramuscular arms, intramuscularly, and that in itself elicits an immune response, and we're able to produce antibodies towards that. So what we've also been doing, and I think has been highly effective, is developing these slides that show basic information that the communities have been very interested in, and presenting to not only to tribal councils, but to tribal health departments. We've also been asked to present to academic institutions, but also making the studies very simplified. If you go on the clinicaltrials.gov and look at some of the clinical trial protocols that are currently posted there, They're very long, they're very complicated, they're very complex. So how do we simplify all that information so it's understandable and digestible in a very short format like we're doing here today? And here is the adenovirus vectors and the coding part for the spike protein. And then once that's injected, our bodies will begin to produce the spike protein. Those are recognized by the blue Ys, which are our antibodies, and these Ys then become what are considered neutralizing antibodies, because then if we come into contact with a native virus, which is this whole virus particle which can cause infection, our neutralizing antibodies bind to all of these spike proteins that are all around the virus particle, and they prohibit it from entering our bodies. They will not be able to bind that ACE2 receptor that I showed in the very first slide, and that thereby produces immunity. And then here is the protein. Remember I had talked about the Novavax, that the proteins are then directly injected into our arms, and then our bodies recognize this protein, produce antibodies, and it's the same concept where the antibodies will then begin to neutralize the viral particle. And then here you can see the study timeline. Again, it's very simplified. What are the days of the visits where I need to go in and give blood? When am I going to get a nasal swab? Do I get a physical exam each time I'm there? So this really helps, I think, simplify this for individuals who want to participate in these trials. They get a more clear picture of what are the requirements, on their time for their participation in this study. So something else that we've also been communicating a lot are around the data and safety monitoring board. Are these vaccines safe? And there's been a lot because of the concerns around the different pauses that have been implemented within a couple of the studies that are ongoing in phase 3 clinical trials. Well, that shows that the DSMB is actually really working. These are single situations where an individual had an adverse reaction, but they had to really stop and pause and go through all the data and all the steps to see, was this caused because of the vaccine, or was this an underlying health issue that this person had already had, and it just exhibited itself at this certain time while they were in the trials. And as you've seen, that all the studies that were currently on a hold have currently been put back into active recruiting phases. So really important part of research. This is very common, but because of a lot of exposure or media exposure, that it has become a concern for a lot of our community members. So our office has really been engaged in this effort. You can see here that the NIAID supports and has developed the Coronavirus Prevention Network. And this group here is a collaboration of all the different research networks that have been in development at the NIH over the last 20 to 30 years. You can see here the HIV Vaccine Trials Network, the Infectious Disease Clinical Research Consortium, all of these with tremendous community clinical trial research experience have been brought together to help share their knowledge, to share their expertise, so that we can expedite community engagement, increase awareness, and provide the most clear information around these vaccine products to the communities, so that they have the most accurate information out there. As we all know, there's a lot of misinformation that's circulating out there. So it's really important for us to share the real information so that people are not afraid. The misinformation generates fear, and we don't want people to be fearful if they want to participate in these different trials. Our job has been to not only work with the tribes, but listen to those who were interested in participating. Tribal nations have reached out to us and said, Dr. Wilson, we are interested in one of these trials. Can you tell us more about it? So we've been able to convene with the tribal councils or with the tribal health departments and provide them with the research protocols for each of these studies that they were interested in, and also provide them with more communication materials to help them better understand the process that they were thinking about engaging. Ultimately, you can see here the blue bubble that's in between tribal nations and clinical trials. This is our ultimate goal, is that we really want to bring this opportunity to tribes and allow them to make that decision whether they choose to participate or not. That is our ultimate goal. Our goal is not to increase the number of AINs enrolled in clinical trials. It is merely to allow them to make that informed decision on whether they choose to participate or not. A really important distinction. Some of the other highlighted activities that we've done, something that I think is really relevant right now is that we held a traditional medicine summit last year, which was really important to talk about the interface between Western science and traditional medicine, and how important thinking about those two can come together. I think that traditional medicine really has a strong place in treatment and therapies. I think that there's an opportunity as we see more mental health issues arise from being isolated because of the pandemic, that traditional medicine in our rural communities could play a vital and intricate part for bringing health back to our tribal members. Epicenters, we've been working a lot with the tribal epicenters to help connect them in various initiatives across the NIH. And here you can see other things. We are finalizing our AIN research portfolio analysis. This helps us understand how the investment of the agency was placed, what research topics were funded, which institutes have contributed, where are the opportunities to improve how we're addressing research in tribal communities. So look to this, to the 2018 report. It should be coming out very soon. We hope to get it out sooner, but we know that things aren't the way they used to be back just 8 months ago. So with that, I want to introduce you to our entire tribal health research team here, and I will stop there for questions. So thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you all.
Thank you, Dave, for that.
There you go.
Thank you, Dave, for that very informative presentation. We really appreciate you coming and participating in the our webinar series. We do, I for one have been so excited to see all of the activities that have come out of the Tribal Health Research Office, having worked at NIH for 13 years and was witness to the growth of that office from the very beginning with the NIH developing their tribal consultation policy, which took a few years to get situated. And then once it was finalized, seeing them put it into action and then actually have and create this Tribal Health Research Office has been something to see and witness. And I really appreciate all of the work that the Tribal Health Research Office has been doing over the last couple of years. I know that you're running all the time, all over the country, working with tribes and working with the various institutes at NIH. And it's, I think we're grateful to have that office. So we do have a couple of questions that have, let me reach out to the people that are actually on the webinar. If you want to unmute your mic and ask a question, we could take a couple of those and then I'll go to the chat. Is there anyone on that would like to unmute their mic and ask a question?
Which of those vaccine, I guess, has the most promise? The reason why I say is because I like that one under the COVE study, where you don't these things don't get into your genes. I want nothing to get into my genes. That's why I'm saying that. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that, Frank. So none of these platforms get to your genes. None of them are integrated into your genome. So all of them are extranuclear. So what happens is that the proteins from the last two that I showed you are injected into the muscles, and that elicits an immune response. With the adenovirus, that is a common cold virus that you pick up from seasonally, and we come into contact with that. It's been around for hundreds of years. It's a non-replicating form, so once it's injected, then it begins to transcribe and translate that spike protein, and then your body recognizes it. And then the difference between the first one, the COVE study, the mRNA protocol, is it's messenger RNA that is injected into your arm, and our bodies immediately recognize that as the instruction sheet to make this spike protein. So our bodies will then make the spike protein, reading that transcript, and then that in itself elicits the immune response to the newly formed peptide. So right now it's really early to say what's the efficacy of the other 4 platforms. Our other 2 platforms that are currently out there, there's 4 products altogether, but it's very promising. And the mRNA one that we're just seeing is the newest platform that's been put into production. So there haven't been any vaccines developed from this platform to date. So this would be actually the first one. So thanks for the question.
Mhm.
I think Olivia had a question.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was helpful to hear about the many moving parts. And there's so much to educate on. I'm a graduate student at Johns Hopkins, and I feel like one of the biggest challenges, and this is in research across academic institutions, but it's been kind of uplifted with the clinical trials on Navajo for the COVID vaccine, is there's already a fair amount of community distrust when it comes to this type of clinical research. And unfortunately, the clinical research in advocating and getting enough Native communities into these types of research options is a slow process. But the biggest issue is just because of this distrust and then this rapid response, because you're trying to, get people involved. And I'm in a phase 3 trials, but there's a reality here where these questions are not being answered. And so not being able to have a transparent community engagement process is a serious concern, I think. Not for just Navajo, I think it's for all communities. Part of the challenges is I think researchers have these like really general checklists they create about who they should go to get the education and share. But I think those checklists need to be re-reviewed. And I don't know how quite to like bring that up in a, I guess, participatory way, because it's the same people they're talking to get their community engagement. So what would you recommend in that type of case to really think about community collective consent? Because this is going to have a direct impact on vaccine uptake when it is ready for communities to get vaccinated.
So yeah, that's a great question. It's a very complex question. I think it really depends too on which communities that we're engaging. So we've been working with communities and tribes in the Pacific Northwest where the communities have been all in. They very much have been supportive of the leadership's decision to allow a clinical trial to be available to them, in the Pacific Northwest. You always will have, I think, a very vocal group of individuals, and I think that you're right, that through clear and consistent communication is the way that you take the fear out of it. And if you're able to take the fear out of it, then it doesn't matter what the individual's decisions are, as long as they're making this decision not based on fear. I think that that's one of our biggest goals, and community engagement is critically important because we hear a lot about information that is too complicated or it's too technical. And we've been working, Hopkins has been very good at developing informational material that helps, I think, demystify the clinical trial process, how vaccines are approved, how long it takes, why it's important to wear a mask even after you're vaccinated. These are all things that we have to think about, that the vaccine, a viable vaccine, is not going to be our end-all, cure-all, because all of our family members may not be able to get the vaccine immediately. And if the person who gets the vaccine and they are exposed to the virus, they could potentially become carriers and then take it back to a family where those individuals who have not have been vaccinated. And so there are things to really consider, that we're still a long ways away from coming out of this. But you're right. One of the things that we've been working on is how to develop that clear and consistent communication so that we're all saying the same thing. And it's helping the communities make those informed decisions on when a vaccine is available, if it will increase uptake, and because there's a lot out there that suggests otherwise. So, great question.
One idea that I have is translation of all the concepts and details of all aspects of transmission, what the virus is and how it works, and also the reasons why you have certain protocols like masking, social distancing. What I do in a lot of cases is I translate these concepts and details into Navajo language, and particularly I choose Navajo words, Navajo descriptions that have to do with people out there. They're not exactly, word for word translations from English, from the scientific to Navajo, but it's to more of what will the people understand. So it's more of that sociolinguistics part that I focus on when I do this, and I know that it helps to be able to explain things in their own terms. The people in the community, and so that's why you need some really carefully have translations that will be effectively heard by the people in the community.
Thank you for that. That's absolutely a really important point that you make, and that we've noticed this through our work just in terms of biomedical research. A lot of terminology in biomedical research is not translated into the Diné language. So it's really important for us to set a foundational base so that everybody knows where we're coming from the get-go, because there were other people who were using analogies for different concepts and different ideas, and so it took a long time just to begin to understand what people were talking about. If we were able to set a foundation or a fundamental base of biomedical or of a research language, that would be, I think, extremely helpful. So I also wanted to say that the NIH has been funding supplemental grants to a lot of different grantees in tribal communities to better understand the virus and how it works. And one of the things that I heard of yesterday is that a study in a tribal community, because a lot of our communities don't have running water, they wanted to see if running water was one of the contributing factors to increase transmission of the disease. Well, it actually turns out that what they're seeing is that it's not the lack of running water, but it is the lack of not speaking the English language and not understanding why it's important to social distance and why it's important to wear a mask. Those were more of contributing factors to disease transmission than running water. So I think there's a lot that we're learning through research that we will continue to learn, and it's really important that we continue to do this research to benefit our communities. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. And thank you everyone for your very thoughtful questions on the webinar, or through your voicing your questions, or else on the chat. We'd like to thank you again, Dave, for your participation in the webinar. We do have several questions that have come into the chat that we're not going to have time to get to today, but we're recording them, and so we'll be sending you some follow-up questions, Dave, and to all the presenters.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and move on to the evaluation. Maggie?
Hi, so just again, I'm going to relaunch the poll. And so if you could go ahead, and it should be up on your screen now, if you could go ahead and complete that. And again, it'll only take about a minute here, and then we'll move on to our next presentation. And again, as we mentioned in the beginning, if you are on your phone or if you aren't able to complete it at this time, we will have the evaluation posted on the website, so you'll have an opportunity to take it there if need be. Great, so it looks like we have about half of our responses in, so we'll just leave it up another 30 seconds or so. All right, just another few seconds here, and we are done, so thank you. All right, Rachel, back to you.
So our next presenter, we'll move on to our next presenter, which is me, Rachael Tracy with the Indian Health Service. If Maggie, if you can go ahead and put up the presentation, I'll be presenting about, and it'll still be pretty quick because I'm gonna try to get us back on time here. We went a little bit over we're a little bit behind on our webinar timing, but that's okay. All of this information is very valuable. I think we probably should have worked in more time for Dave's presentation. I know, especially now during COVID, you know, there's a lot of interest and a lot of interest around COVID. But thank you again, everyone, for participating in that presentation with questions. So Maggie, if you can go ahead and put up the webinar, my presentation. I'll be talking with you all about navigating, giving some information about the Indian Health Service IRBs and tribal IRBs. Actually, I was thinking as I was reviewing my presentation, I need to rename my slides as my presentation as research oversight bodies, I guess, because it varies greatly across Indian country.
Rachel, I only had your first slides. I didn't get your presentation, your IRB presentation slides.
Oh. Okay, well, I have it up here. Let me, I have it on my desk here. Let me just pull it up real quick. All right, so let's see here. I thought I had it up. Oh, here we go. So I just need to share my screen then?
So if you click that share screen, it'll pop up with any of the screens you have open right now, and you'll just need to find the one if it's a PowerPoint, you'll find that one, for example.
Okay. Do you see it?
Yeah, so that is the
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. Where is it? Oh. All right. Do you see it now?
So go ahead back to your share screen. And yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
So, all right, we'll go ahead and get started here. So I work with the Indian Health Service, and our mission is to raise the physical, mental, social, and spiritual health of American Indians and Alaska Natives to the highest level. Our IHS research program mission is to support national health research, including human subject research protections related to health problems and the delivery of healthcare to American Indian and Alaska Natives. This aligns with This aligns with our strategic goal as part of the overall IHS strategic plan. Hold on. The objectives of our institutional review board or of IRBs are in place to ensure that research observes the 3 principles of ethics, which come out of the Belmont report, and that is respect for persons, beneficence, which means to do no harm and to maximize the benefit. And we're also looking at justice. The basis of IRB oversight are several federal policy. We have federal policy and federal regulations, also known as the Common Rule. And the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR 45 Part 46, is one of those regulations, but that contains a whole horde of regulations that help guide IRBs in conducting oversight of research activities. The FDA has follow a similar type of regulations, and that's CFR 21 Parts 50 and 56. And those are that oversight or federal oversight body deals with when doing research with drugs, devices, biologic, foods, or color additives, and those are subject to federal FDA regulations. We work very closely with the Office of Human Research Protections, and we also have another committee that works on the backside to make sure that the rules and regulations are staying up to date, and they also review to try to make sure that the rules and regs that are out there stay current and relevant to what is going on in the real world as far as research goes and research protections for participants. And that's the Secretary's Advisory Committee on Human Research Protections. So we like to say that these research protections here are just the floor. I hear that a lot in when we're dealing with our IHS and our tribal IRB committees. The federal regulations are the floor, or the basis of oversight of research when it comes to, and not the ceiling. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I go through my presentation, because as many of you probably know, we have oversight entities that deal specifically with research that's taking place in tribal communities or within IHS, tribal communities, tribal organizations that are dealing with American Indians, Alaska Natives, and as well as within the Indian Health Service. And each of those oversight bodies have their own additional guidelines and policies that they follow that have a unique aspect to where they're looking at protections of American Indians, Alaska Natives specifically, but also tribal communities as a whole. Within the Indian Health Service, we have just an example, we have some guidance here where if research is going to be taking place in IH facilities or with IHS staff or resources, those research activities must be approved by an IHS institutional review board. And we have one national IRB. Sorry guys. We have one national IRB here located at headquarters in Rockville, Maryland, and our members are located throughout the country. We also have 8 area IRBs. The Indian Health Service is made up of 12 areas, and 8 of those areas have operate in IRB, and there's 4 that do not have an IRB, and the national IRB reviews for those areas that do not have their own IRB. And this oversight would include research that's done in tribal and or urban facilities. Since IHS tribal and urban sites fall under the IHS federal wide assurance, IRBs, IHS IRBs are the only IRBs that have authority to review and approve studies that take place in federally operated IHS facilities. The FWA is the IHS Director's Assurance to the Department of Health and Human Services, OHRP, office that all research conducted under his or her purview will follow Title CFR 45 CFR 46 and the Belmont Report. Tribal and urban facilities may obtain their own FWA and work with IHS OHRP. There are also a number of independent tribal organization or tribal oriented organizations that have developed or that can develop their own, obtain their own FWA in order to set up like an IRB. IHS encourages and will provide guidance to tribal and urban health programs engaging in research to obtain independent, their own independent FWAs, as well as provide some guidance in assisting them in guidance in them setting up their own IRBs. The common rule, which is the overall rule that contains all of the guidance and the rules and regs and federal regulations that guide our activities as human subjects research protections. The common rule affirms that each tribe may have, and this was just updated over the last couple of years and implemented or activated last summer or last spring. The common rule affirms that each tribe may have its own definition of research and its own set of research protections and laws that may have more restrictions than the common rule. Like I said, the common rule is sort of the floor, the basis, but tribes and IHS and these tribal organization oversight committees can have their own rules and regulations and tribal law that guides their oversight of research activities. Researchers must also receive appropriate approvals and review from the tribe throughout the process. And we'll go through that a little bit as we go through the presentation. As part of the common rule introduced the single idea or the concept of single IRB requirement for multi-site cooperative research studies as one of their measures to decrease the administrative burden on researchers and IRBs. And that just an example, quick example is if you have several research say universities that are all participating in one on one study, and there's research, multiple sites located throughout the country. In the old days, I guess way back when, before the update to the common rule, each of those universities would have had those researchers go through each of their own IRBs. Well, the common rule came up with the single IRB where they would coordinate and work with one IRB, and they'd have to come into agreement on which IRB is going to be the oversight body for that multi-site study. The final rule, the common rule revisions included 2 exceptions to the single IRB requirement, and that applies directly to tribes and the Indian Health Service. Research that is not part of the single IRB requirement is any cooperative research where local law specifically requires additional review. And that applies to, where this would be an example of what the exception applies to, and that includes any tribal laws passed by American Indian and Alaska Native official governing bodies. The other exception is a supporting common rule. Federal agency or department can decide if the single IRB approval process is not appropriate for a specific research project and require the project partners to use additional IRBs and resources. And this is where the IHS IRBs fall under that exception. So our Indian Health Service IRBs do not participate in the single common rule. I know that NIH has a single IRB requirement or policy for studies that are coming out of there, but IHS IRBs do not participate in that. And as far as I'm aware, there are none to very little tribal IRBs that participate in the single IRB, but that might be changing. That might have changed over the last year or so. But and you'll understand why as we go through the presentation. So. In general, most IRBs that are not IHS or tribal IRBs, or in addition to the IHS and tribal IRBs, the basic premise and the basic concepts, the basic objectives of IRBs, all IRBs is to, as far as risks go, are to make sure that risks to subjects are less than minimal in relation to the anticipated benefits. We also look at with the selection of subjects to make sure that the selection of subjects is equitable, especially with our vulnerable populations. For example, pregnant women, children, or prisoners. Some of our tribal IRBs and IHS IRBs even do not have a thing that we call exemptable when a study comes in, and they can either be expedited or they can also be exemptable but some of our IRBs don't have that option because they consider American Indians and Alaska Natives in our tribal communities vulnerable populations. So they have to go through the full IRB review. We also look at, to make sure that informed consent is sought and properly documented. We look at making sure that the data collection process and disposition is clearly defined, meaning the destruction of data or of data and or biospecimens, and making sure that that's all worked out and safe and proper. We look at make sure that provisions are made and that are there to protect the privacy of individuals. Privacy is a really big thing when it comes to research. People are not, and to make sure that people are not coerced in participating either by loss of services or huge incentives. So when it comes to, so here's some of the differences when it comes to non-IHS or non-tribal IRBs or oversight entities. We have a concern for communities, tribal communities, tribes. We want to make sure that they have full awareness and that consent of tribal authorities within the community are obtained, and that those tribal authorities and tribal communities and even the IRBs are involved in making sure that the tribes that are getting involved with research studies are fully informed of what they're getting involved in. That we also require, many of them, or if not all of them, require some sort of tribal resolution or letter of support that gets submitted with the protocol. And that's to make sure, again, that these tribal authorities are aware of what is going to be taking place when it comes to the research. We also, this could include several approvals. You know, for example, they may have to get researchers, they meaning researchers, may have to get approvals from several entities within the community, and that could include the tribal authority or tribal health department, service unit directors or area directors. We also want to ensure the tribe is not coerced in participating and understands any resource requirements, meaning they have to we want them to understand the staffing that's going to be involved or required and what they might have to put up to participate in the research. Funding, if there's going to be any funding, making sure that everyone's aware of what that is. Also, what types of facilities might be involved, where the research is going to be taking place within the tribal community or within a tribal IHS tribally operated facility or an IHS federal facility. We also want to make sure that there's meaningful ownership and control over data when it comes to tribe having, you know, fully executing their tribal sovereignty and their right to have a say in ownership and control over data that's going to be obtained as part of the research activities that are going to be taking place. And this would include review and input into publications while still in draft form. Many of our IHS and tribal IRBs have that requirement written into their approval to where when researchers want to publish, the IRBs are involved with the review of publications. We also want to make sure that data collected for one study isn't used for other purposes without proper tribal approval. So these are some unique things that I'll just call them regular IRBs, non-native oriented IRBs, often do not consider when they're reviewing study protocols. And that is actually starting to change in the recent years, over the last couple of years, more and more. Again, like I said, our tribal IRBs are oversight entities we review. We focus on not only the individual, but the tribal community. Our IRBs are oversight representatives on the IRBs, whether they're IHS or tribal, have the best knowledge of their local community and can minimize potential harms and misunderstandings. These types of IRBs provide an extra layer of protection and often require additional steps and considerations. Tribal members and tribal communities may mistrust researchers. That just came up on as a question or a comment with Dave's presentation. Educating communities about the purpose or role of IRBs and the support of a local IRB may encourage more people to participate in research. I know just in general that IRBs are not well understood, or there hasn't been a lot of education about the role of IRBs out in Indian country. And I think with all of the COVID activities taking place, just from what I've been hearing, there's that comment or a suggestion of, when it comes to educating the community about research, that also include information about IRBs and their role and how they're there to help protect the individual, but also the community. This is just a map of where our IHS IRBs are located. Like I said, Nationals located here in Maryland. We have the blue stars are the IRBs or the areas in the IRB where they don't have IRBs and they defer to the national IRB. The red stars are where we have areas that operate their own IRBs. I just wanted to give a quick hint about some things to think about when you're applying to an IHS IRB, and then I'm going to go into explain a little bit more about the tribal, describe a little bit more about the tribal IRBs. Some things to consider when we go to when IHS is dealing with research and our IRBs are dealing with research, and because we're a healthcare system and because we're providers of healthcare and we are dealing with patients, oftentimes the researchers are, we're looking at, we always, these are some other things that we have to look at. We have privacy and confidentiality rules and regs that we are looking at. Those include HIPAA, Privacy Act. We have some other rules that deal with confidentiality of substance use disorder as far as patient records go. So those are just an example of some of the privacy issues or regs that we also have to consider when we're looking at privacy for research. All projects planning to collect information for non-clinical purposes from groups of IHS patients should be reviewed by the appropriate IRB. And we recommend this. It's very important when researchers are starting or wanting to do research with any sort of contact with IHS because of these extra requirements that we have. When dealing with the IHS tribal or urban electronic health records and data, researchers may also have to consider data sharing agreements, data use agreements, MOUs, business associate agreements. We also, when data is potentially going to be, when researchers request for data from the Indian Health Service, from our EHR or RPMS, we also have to go through an IT security review. Our Office of General Counsel gets involved for review. Our lead statistician gets involved. Privacy officer gets involved. So these again are just a whole nother layer when it comes to dealing with review of protocols and things that we have to look at because again we're a healthcare provider and we're dealing with patients oftentimes and patient records. So this is just a description and to show you the huge variety of ways that tribes conduct research oversight within their communities. Some tribes administer their own IRBs. For example, Cherokee Nation, Chickasaw Nation, there's a whole nother list of additional tribes that have their own IRB. Some tribes rely on tribal college or university IRBs. Example, the Lummi Nation does not have their own tribal IRB, but they work with the Northwest Indian College IRB for review of research taking place in their community. Some tribes rely on other independent tribal organization IRBs. For example, Pueblos, some of the Pueblos in New Mexico work with the Southwest Tribal IRB located at the Albuquerque Area Indian Health Board. I think that IRB was set up as part of a NARCH grant. The California Rural Indian Health Board IRB reviews research for tribes that are members of CRIB. Some tribes who do not have an IRB might have a research review committee, which is not exactly an IRB, but it serves a similar function. And then there are some tribes that don't have an IRB or research review committee, but they may have a publications review committee. They may also work with their tribal councils and or their health departments for reviews of research and or publications. So you see there's quite a variety of how tribes handle review of research. And we recommend that researchers get in touch with the tribe, or if you know there's an IRB, if you're wondering whether there is or not, you can reach out to us and we can help you track down which IRBs and that you'll be working with for your research approvals. So here's a listing, just as an example of some of the existing tribal and or independent tribal organization IRBs or research oversight entities. This is just a listing of examples of some of those. We know that there's about 50 known research oversight entities that vary greatly and what exactly they are. This is the end of my presentation, and thank you so much for your time, and I'll go ahead and take questions now. Oh, I don't think we have time for questions. So what do you think, Maggie?
So there's one question in the chat box, so maybe we can do that one. It's from Delight with the CDC. Can you go further into dual use research with the primary research conducted in tribal and urban Indian organizations? What is the current guidance?
Dual use? Can you read that again?
Sure. Can you go further into dual use research with the primary research conducted in tribal and urban Indian organizations? What is the current guidance? And Delight, if you're still on and you wanted to clarify your question, you're welcome to unmute yourself.
What I'm referring to is secondary studies using the data from the original study.
Oh, I mean, it's allowed, but when that requirement is going to come in, that still has to go through an IRB review. And with the IHS or the tribal IRBs, they would be looking at the original research to see how those are related, and then looking at that the secondary research that's going to be taking place. And we are looking, and that includes looking at the consenting process to make sure that what was consented for within to make sure that the consenting process is fully thought out and obtained. Secondary use, if there was, we have to make sure that participants are giving permission or gave permission to have their data used in that manner. I can provide more details about that guidance as a follow-up, Delight. I don't know that I answered your question very well.
Oh, thanks. I think it would be great if Maggie can share that at a later time.
Yeah. And we do have record of all of your questions in here, but I really want to get to Frank Morgan's presentation. I think you all are going to have, this will probably be one of your favorite parts of the webinar. This is our student-focused presentation where we try to work with students, whether we bring them in as presenters or we try to bring in presenters that are able to serve as mentors and provide guidance or information or some sort of experiential opportunity for students in this what's supposed to be the second hour, but it's kind of morphed into something else as we work with our different presenters. So I wanted to introduce
Rachel, sorry, real quick. Let's do our evaluation for your presentation real quick.
Oh, okay.
And, yeah. So everyone, once again, we're gonna relaunch this poll, and if you could just complete it here in about 60 seconds, that would be great. Hopefully you see it up on your screens now. Great. And it does look like we're getting responses in, so thank you for doing that. We appreciate it. And just make sure you scroll all the way to the bottom. Great. And if you haven't done it yet, go ahead and fill out that poll, and we will. Good. We've got a couple more responses coming in. Maybe we'll give it about 10 more seconds.
Valerie, I did see your question. I'm actually already involved in that Mayo activity. I can follow up with you after the call.
All right, and we're going to close the poll. So thank you again for doing that. And Rachel, you can continue on.
All right, so I want to introduce Frank Morgan. Frank, are you still with us? Yep, he's still there. Mr. Morgan went to a BIA school and public school, and he studied at the University of New Mexico, Southwestern Oklahoma State University, and Fort Lewis College. His studies led to an ethnographic research career in which his knowledge of Navajo culture and language became his primary means in his work. Mr. Morgan is a translator, interpreter, curriculum writer, health educator, and organizational trainer. And he's going to share some of his thoughts and also some 1 or 2 winter stories. Welcome, Frank. Thank you. He's also been on a couple of our webinars previously, and he's always very interesting to hear from. Thank you for joining us, Frank.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody. I'm of the Salt Clan. Yucca Fruit people are my fathers. Ledge of Mountain are my grandfathers. Mini Goats are my paternal grandfathers. And I come from the Four Corners. And so today, what time is it right now? Is it almost, I'm supposed to be done at 2:30, right?
So we've run way over, unfortunately. So you can go ahead and take maybe about 10 or 15 minutes.
Okay, good. All right, thank you very much. At this time, we usually start with our discussions and thinking about the time of the year where we are. So now it's in November, and the winter has started, and we don't work in the fields anymore. So a lot of people are, they have time to do a lot of teaching and storytelling. So in the evenings, we family gets together, and after dinner, make some snacks and some teas, herbal teas and so forth, corn cakes, and they tell stories. And the reason why we tell stories is because there's a lot of knowledge there, and there are a lot of teachings there. These teachings have to do with moral and ethical conduct, and skills, what kind of skills you need to learn, in your lifetime. So one of the stories, one of the characters that we often talk a lot about is the coyote. Of course, there are other characters that are talked about in storytelling, like rabbits, skunks, all other animals, like even the deer, the moose, and so forth. But the favorite one is the coyote. And so at this time, we tell stories about the travels and experiences of the coyote. A coyote, in Navajo, we call them ma'i, meaning one who wanders, one who travels about, one who wanders around. And from place to place. So he's done this so many times, and he's gotten himself into trouble with people, with all the beings that are there. And so he began to annoy people. And so the name Ma'i kind of like has a context which kind of like means one who's not wanted there, you know, one who's to be excluded. And the reason they want to exclude him is because he always causes frustration, disturbance, and so forth. So they always tell him to leave. And he travels about, mainly, he's not really looking to help somebody or, you know, to do something good, but mainly to pry into others' business and activities and see what he can get into. Mostly what he can get out of whatever he gets into. So while he's doing this, the overall effect has been that there's some philosophical things that are taken from that. So for example, in the philosophy, holy people, now the time when these stories came about was before humans came into existence. It's pre-human. And the holy people were organizing, laying out, mapping the sky, the night sky with stars. They were making it into perfect order, you know, just a perfect system up there. Everything was to have, you know, a certain number of distance and so forth. And they were laying it out on hides. So he comes by and he says, you know, we're trying to figure out how to design the sky with the stars. And so then he says, why don't you just do this? And he grabs a hold of the hide, the buckskin, and just throws it up into the air. And that's when that's why we have stars everywhere. And there's no system up there, it seems, as you look at it from here. And what came about from that activity was imperfection. He thought that things should not be so perfect, so systematic, because things will change. Everything is changeable. And if something is not so perfect, it will be resilient. It will be able to withstand a lot of changes that occur. For example, like in the months of the year at this time, we have to adjust it every 4 years, right? The number of days in the month. And February is the one that's affected. So we have to adjust it back by using an extra day in there, putting an extra day. So that was his purpose for doing that. That things should be flexible, not so locked up in perfection. So that was what he contributed to the nature of the universe and all the relationships that take place in the universe. So that's like, for example, even in chemistry, you have a principle that says Le Chatter's principle. Le Chatter's principle is that when a system is affected, when a change comes into a system, it will respond to it, and it will respond to it in such a way it will come back to a new equilibrium. So new things will happen, and but it will always come back to equilibrium. And so that's what we see is like today, you know, we have climate change. We say, I don't think it's the only thing that's been changing the environment. It's been changing all this time, and we just, I think humans just speeded it up by putting more chemicals and heat and stuff into the environment. They just aggravated it more. So we do see that, and so when something is disturbed, it will go through some very strong conditions. Like we have tornadoes, hurricanes, very bad storms and drought conditions and so forth. So this is what's going on right now. And so we just think about it. We think about it and live with these conditions, live with these the way things flow and progress through time. So that's what we learn from that. So he was also, this coyote was also going around and seeing different animals, you know, doing certain things. Like one time he comes to a place where he sees these birds, you know, taking their eyes out and throwing it up to the air and catching it.
I know that.
And so then he says, let me try it, you know, take out my eyes, I want to try it. Throw it up into the air, I want to catch it. And so the birds there said, no, this is not for you, you know, get away from here, you know, go away. This is not for you. You're going to ruin your eyes. And no, he said, no, please, you know, let me try, you know, just once. So he kept doing that. And for the fourth time, the bird said, okay, well, we'll just let you try just one time. And so they took out his eyes, they threw it up in the air, and his eyes got caught in the branches of a pine tree. It didn't come back down. So they didn't know what else to do. And the coyote was there. He said, I'm blind, get something so I can see. So the birds got together and said, why don't we get some old pine pitch, you know, one that's dry and yellow. So they took that, they put that in his eyes. And so somehow it worked so that he had vision. But the thing is, that's why his eyes are yellow, they say. So, and then another time he was running along and he comes to some otters playing by the river. And they were taking off their hide and jumping into the water. And they come up wearing a new hide. It was a really beautiful hide that they wear when they come out of that water. And Coyote saw that, and he went over there and he wanted to improve on his hide, on his coat. He already had a really beautiful coat, It was shiny and beautiful, and he was very handsome in it. But then, and then he kept saying, you know, to the otters, I want to try it. I want to try it. I want to get a new coat. And they tried to tell him not to try it. But the fourth time, the otters said, okay, well, we'll let you try once. Then he jumped in. Oh, they took off his hide. And he was whimpering, crying, you know, as they took off his hide. And then when they got done, he jumped into the river. He came up all, you know, gasping for air and everything. And then he comes out, he was still naked. No new hide. So he did that 4 times. And then the otter said, oh my goodness, you know, what have we done? You're gonna die. You don't have any coat. So they looked around and they saw a burrow of a badger. So they went over there and asked the badger to see who had a hide. So the badger gave them a hide, which was kind of like old and kind of like it's real dirty and everything. So they gave it to him, and they put it on the coyote, and so that became his new coat. instead of the one that looks real nice, he ended up with a real old looking hide, and so that's why his hair, his coat is like the way it is. You see him when you see them around in the environment, and but what Navajo people say is that a coyote is very, very wealthy. It's in his hair. It's in his coat. They say. Yeah, that they say. You know, he just has it. And so when it runs across your path, you go there, and you talk to the coyote, and you ask that if his message, by running across your path, he will have delivered a message to you, depending upon which way he's running. If he's running east, south, or out toward the west, it's all right. Things are okay for you. Things are good for you. But when it's running toward the north, they say, then a lot of older people, they say, well, that's not a coyote. It's something very evil going that way. So something horrible or terrible is going to happen to you. So you need to have some protection way ceremonies, you know, to protect yourself. But so when he runs across your path, they always say, go out there, just take some dirt, because dirt has pollen in it, and you sprinkle it across his path, and then you say, you know, the message you gave me, if it's good, I want it. I will take care of it. If it's bad, I don't want it. I don't want it to happen. So that's what you say. And so by doing that, you will have respected the coyote's message. And so he's a protector that way. And he's also a healer. He was one time there was this, one of the holy people was sick. And so all the other holy people came together, and they were trying different ceremonies that they knew to help the person. But none of these were helping. And Coyote was sitting there. And then finally he spoke up and he says, that one is not going to recover. He's not going to get well unless I do my ceremony. And so the holy people said, no, we don't want you messing this up. We don't want you fooling around here. You know, you cause a lot of problems. Go outside, go sit somewhere else. And so they sent him away. And then they continued their ceremonies. Nothing was working. And then so one of the holy people there said, well, why don't we ask that person that just went out, see if something will help there. So he came in and he did his ceremony, and the patient began to improve right away. So so what he does is respected, you know, without question. So this is a lesson about, you know, how you expect or respect somebody that does not seem to have enough knowledge or is not credible. They may be. So be careful, you know, on how you judge others on things. So that's the lesson on that. And then he's a problem solver. So one day he was out running around, and he comes to a place where where a rabbit was given a report to the other animals there. And he had snake with him, a snake. And so the rabbit says, I found the snake over on the other side of the hill. A rock had fallen on him. And so he begged me to remove the rock. And so I refused to remove the rock. And so I told the snake that if I remove the rock, you're going to catch me right away, and then you're going to eat me. And then the snake says, no, I won't do that. No, I won't do that. I promise you, I won't do that. And so they kept arguing back and forth like that. And then finally they said, there's a person living over there behind the hill. Let's go ask him. Let's go talk to him. See if it's okay for you to remove the rock. So then the rabbit removes the stone, and they went to that place, and Coyote was there. And so the rabbit tells his story. So then Coyote says, okay, well, let's check this out. Let's go look and see, you know, what happened here. You know, take me to the place where it happened. So they all went to that place. And so then Coyote said to the snake, okay, where were you when this happened? Then snake says, I was coming along right here when all of a sudden this rock came and dropped on me. There was a drop, you know, it was quite a ways up. And then somebody, okay, let's reenact this whole thing, says Coyote. So Coyote says, okay, two of you take that rock back up to the top there. And then Snake, you come along. And when you're about right here, you know, we'll turn that rock loose and have it fall on you. And so they did that, and the rock falls on the snake again. And so it was hard for him to get away. And then, so is that what happened? Then Snake says, yeah, that's exactly what happened. And then for some strange reason, Coyote says, well, now you see, he proved that this happened. And so now we know that it happened. So let's just go on now. Let's just go on with our lives. And so everybody just left there, and the snake was still under under the rock. And so, so that's how he handled that situation. And you can think about that and see what the moral is there about having come under the same conditions that the snake was in, and see what would come to your mind about it, and make up your own story of the moral of that situation. So I think I will stop here and see if there's anybody who wants to make a comment or maybe tell a story.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Those are great. I love those coyote stories. I grew up listening to them. They're especially funny when you hear them in Navajo.
Oh yeah, it's hilarious when you hear this in Navajo.
Yeah.
When you tell it in English, yeah. It loses everything.
Yeah, when you hear it in Navajo, and then I know that there are some videos out there that were created around the coyote stories, and those are really funny because they're kind of a cartoon, kind of old school cartoon, and then Navajo dubbed onto it, and so the characters are all created, and it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us, Frank. We really appreciate it, and it'll help us go on to fulfill the rest of today. And I hope it brings peace to people who were able to hear the stories and help settle our souls for the remaining day, and think about these stories as you go through your winter. Yeah, we really appreciate it. We know we're way over time, guys. Hang in there with us. We're getting ready to do the evaluation.
All right, so this is Maggie again. I'm gonna pop the evaluation up on your computer screen. If you can go ahead and take that real quick. You'll also notice I put my email in the chat. So if you did have questions for any of our presenters today and we weren't able to get to them, go ahead and reach out to me with that question, and I will make sure to get in touch with the appropriate presenter and get that answer to you. So go ahead and check the chat for my email. And it's all over the NNHRT website too if you aren't able to access the chat. All right, so we'll just give it another 30 seconds here for this poll. And if you haven't started yet, go ahead and complete that. And thank you for sticking with us a little longer as we ran over a little bit today. All right, we'll finish up here in just about 5 seconds. Okay, thank you. And I'll send it back to Rachel.
So again, thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. We really appreciate your time and the questions that you've submitted, and also your interest in the National Native Health Research Training Initiative and our webinars. We'll be hosting 2 more webinars. The next one's scheduled for December 9th, 2 to 3. That's going to be an hour. And then we have another one scheduled January 13th, again, 2 to 3. And we'll have some interesting presenters. We hope you're able to join us at those next webinars. And thank you to the AHEC and NRN for your support and helping us carry out these webinars. And if anyone has remaining questions, or if we didn't answer your questions in the chat, please submit them to Maggie. She'll make sure to capture the chat questions, and we'll make sure to get with the presenters to get a response for you all. Thank you again, and this will conclude our webinar. Thank you very much.